In this video, I want to introduce you to what's called a chop saw, also called a miter saw. All the different power tool manufacturers make these. This is essentially a cross-cutting tool. So cross-cutting is the action of cutting a piece of wood across the grain. Not necessarily 90 degrees, it can be at an angle. The grain, the length of the board runs this way. You know, this came from a tree that grew this way. So cross-cutting is cutting across the grain. Most of your cross-cuts will be at 90 degrees. Some of them will be at different angles if you're doing trim work and things like that. So I just want to give you the basics of how this works. Most homeowners don't have a chop saw, but basic models are not very expensive and they will be extremely useful to you as you're finishing a basement. Now, this is not a basic model. This is a battery-powered sliding, what they call a sliding compound miter saw. For basement use, a plug-in model is fine. This battery business here, it's the same sort of battery that a cordless drill might take, and it provides a little bit more flexibility, easier portability, but a corded model is going to give you more value for the money. So I would look for something like that. As I said, this is set up now to cut at 90 degrees, and I'll show you a sample cut in a minute. But all miter saws, regardless of how complicated or simple, have a swiveling table like this. So in this case, I can go from more than 45 degree angle cut that way to more than 45 degrees this way. For most of the cuts, you'll be at 90 degrees, and you basically just leave your saw there. This particular saw is called a sliding compound miter saw because it slides. So even though this is a pretty small blade, you know, this is not much bigger than the blade on a typical circular saw, it can cross-cut quite a width of wood because it travels on these sliding rails. Now, there's one other thing. As I said, it's called a sliding compound miter saw, and compound means that this thing can swivel in different directions. So in addition to cutting an angle this way, it can also lie down, and you can cut what's called a bevel angle, which would be an angle to the face of the board. And in this case, it can go both ways. Not all saws can go both ways. So technically speaking, this is a dual sliding compound miter saw because it can flip over in both directions. So a couple of safety tips before we get going. Every chop saw, in fact every power tool in the world, is going to come with a lot of very specific safety recommendations for that particular model. So be sure you read the manual. All of the detailed safety information is there. But just a couple of points that are universal to all machines. Safety glasses, kind of goes without saying. Earmuffs might not go without saying. These things are pretty loud. I don't think you absolutely have to wear earmuffs when you cut with something like this, but I do all the time. I just find it more comfortable, and why take any chances with your hearing? So another thing, this is the danger zone here, of course. The blade is going to come down, and it's going to cut anything that's there. So you really do not want to put your hands anywhere near the danger zone. So when I cut this piece of wood, for instance, the last thing I do before I pull the trigger is I say to myself, well, is anything valuable or injurable in the cut line? And if no, then I can go ahead and make my cut. But you never, even if you're cutting something short, say it's a narrow piece of wood, you never want to, you know, hold anything near the cut zone, because it is possible for the blade to grab the wood and to push itself forward. So if you're not expecting it, you want to make a cut this way, it's conceivable that the machine can move forward on its own when the blade encounters the wood. So naturally, you just want to keep your hands well away. So one hand on the handle and one hand holding the wood as far away as you can. When I make a cut like this, I like to start here from the outside and slide in, because the rotation of the blade is this way. And if I start here and I start moving the saw in that direction, I'm moving in the same direction that the blade is rotating. So that'll give it more of a chance to kick back. So I always like to work against that movement whenever I can. And you'll see me doing that when I make this cut. One other thing I want to show you just before I make this cut. Some, not all, but some saws have an illuminated method to show you where the blade is going to cut. So I've got a pencil mark here. Let's say I want to cut right on that spot. I actually want to split the line. So I want this to be an accurate cut. This particular saw has a light which shines on either side of the blade. So the blade creates a shadow line, and of course, since the blade's making the shadow line, you know exactly where the blade's going to cut. So not all saws have this capability. Some have nothing at all. Some have what's a laser cut line system, but those laser ones are never as accurate as the ones that have the light that shines on either side of the blade, and the blade creates the shadow. Because when the blade creates the shadow, then you know that shadow mark is always absolutely accurate. Whereas the laser ones, they're shining on their own, and they need to be adjusted and trued up because they're not using the blade as a guide. So I strongly recommend something with a line. When I start the cut, you're going to take a look. Right now you can see the larger, wider areas where each tooth is. So it's not really perfectly indicative of where it's going to cut. But once I start the cut, you will see that the shadow line is just one smooth, dark line. It all takes on a kind of a blur, as you'll see. So safety glasses on, earmuffs on. So, a pretty successful cut. If you look closely, you'll see that a little bit of the line, a little bit of the pencil lead is still there. That's just the way I wanted it to be. And take a look at how smooth this is. I mean, nice and square. It's square this way, and it's square to the face, and it's nice and flat, and you saw how fast that cut. So, like I said, if you've got a basement to finish and you want to be pretty hands-on about the work, then a chop saw is the kind of tool that'll make a big difference if you don't have one.